I hooked up with my husband's divorce lawyer. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, glaring at the man seated across from me. "I could ask you the same thing," he retorted. The man in question was Paul, my husband's lawyer and, unfortunately, my ex. Before I married Max, we had had a bad breakup, one I solely blamed on Paul. And here he was, ruining my life again. "Save it, Paul! I am well acquainted with your lies! You must have seen my name on the official documents," I snapped. "I did. But forgive me for not guessing that in a world of billions and a name as common as Jason Hall, it would actually be you," he replied with infuriating calmness. "Ugh, you're insufferable! Couldn't Max find a better lawyer than you?" I said irritably. "He could, but not as good as me. So you're stuck with me through this whole divorce process," he smirked. "I'd rather stay married to Max for the rest of my life than deal with you," I shot back. "Really? Come on, I am not that bad. I am sure I'll grow on you," he smirked. "No way in hell," I muttered angrily. As I watched his smug grin in response, I felt an urge to strangle him. How was I supposed to survive weeks of this? It was going to be pure torture. Flashback a few days ago. "Max, did you use our money to buy useless stuff again?" I asked in frustration. Max was my husband, and we had been married for 5 years. But nothing about us said we were happily married. Our relationship was based on compromise, and though everything was fine in the beginning, it started deteriorating as the years went by. Now most days we either argued or ignored each other entirely. "What are you talking about?" he asked defensively. I sighed, trying to stay calm. "A huge amount of money is missing from our joint account. You could have at least asked before taking it." "Wow, so now I need your permission to use my own money?" he shot back. "It's not just your money, Max. Most of our savings come from my earnings, and I don't want you to waste it away gambling," I yelled in anger. "Here we go again. Your money, your hard work. You love making me feel like a failure, don't you?" he snapped. "Anyway, I didn't gamble it away, but used it on my friends," he shrugged. "You spent $5,000 on friends, all at once? Did you sponsor their trip to Europe or something?" I asked in shock. "As if. A Europe trip is much more costly. I just took them out for dinner at the most expensive restaurant in the city," Max scoffed. "And why would you do that?" I demanded. "Because I was sick of going to the same old restaurants over and over again. Anyway, money is for spending only, so stop with these ridiculous questions," Max retorted and walked out of the room. I stared at him in frustration. This wasn't the first time Max had wasted our money like this. Yet every time I confronted him, it resulted in fights, and I was tired of arguing with him again and again. I knew it would have been better to just leave him, but I wasn't ready to give up on such a long marriage. 2 days later. "Hey Jason, I'm going out with my friends tonight. Don't wait up for me," Max said casually. "What? Have you already forgotten we plan to go watch a movie tonight?" I asked in shock. "Oh, that must have slipped my mind. Never mind, we can go next time," he shrugged. "Are you serious? Do you have any idea how hard it was for me to take out time for this? Otherwise, I would have been working. Do you have no respect for my time or me?" I asked angrily. "Oh, come on, you're always crying about your time and work. Just because you don't have a life, that doesn't mean others don't either. I already made plans with my friends. We can go next time," he retorted. "No, there won't be a next time. In fact, we're never going together again," I snapped, my anger boiling over. "What's that supposed to mean?" Max asked with irritation. "It means I want a divorce. I am tired of our daily arguments. There's nothing left in this relationship," I replied coldly. "Are you out of your mind? Who divorces for stupid reasons like this? Or are you seeing someone else?" Max accused sharply. "How dare you accuse me of cheating? That's a low blow, even for you. I've been nothing but loyal in our relationship," I shot back, furious. "Then why do you want a divorce? Whatever arguments we have, we always work through them," he said dismissively. "Because of this carefree attitude of yours. You never take anything seriously. Anyway, our arguments don't get resolved. We just end up compromising, and I am tired of it. I am gonna file for a divorce. It's the best decision for us. It's not a sudden thought either. I have been thinking about it for weeks now," I admitted. "Wow, so you've decided everything by yourself. Well, you're not the boss of me. I am not gonna go through with this divorce. I'll fight you in court if I have to," he shot back. "I never thought you'd stoop this low. Fine. If that's what you want, let's go to court, I replied firmly. I was determined to not let Max win, even if it meant hiring the best lawyer in the city. Flashback ends. I sat across from Paul on the couch glaring at him. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, he had appeared out of nowhere, throwing my life into chaos again. Why are you defending a guy like Max anyway? All he wants is money, I snapped at him. Mr. Hall, you can't talk about my client like this, Paul replied coolly. Ha! As if. We both know you are working with him just to ruin my life again, I retorted bitterly. Paul sighed, leaning back in his seat. Jason, I'm not interested in your life. At all. Max found me by coincidence. And, as I've said before, I had no idea this case involved you. I mean, I never expected to see you married, let alone to someone like him. What did you expect me to do? Keep pining for you for years? I shot back. Of course not, but I didn't expect you to end up with a guy like Max. I mean, you could do much better, he smirked. Who's belittling their client now? I quipped, raising an eyebrow. Paul grinned. I'm a lawyer. I know exactly where my client stands. I was just stating facts. I knew you would come up with an excuse like that, I grimaced. Paul's demeanor shifted suddenly, his tone turning serious. Let's move on to the divorce proceedings. Are you sure you want to go through with this? It could lead to significant consequences for you. Yes, I am sure. I have already suffered long in this marriage. I can't take it anymore, I replied. If that's the case, we could aim for a settlement. Max would receive half of your property and wealth. That's the best I can negotiate on your behalf, he said, his voice businesslike. Best? I scoffed. Much more like the worst deal. There's no way I'm handing over half of what I've worked so hard to earn. Are you planning to give him nothing? Paul asked, his tone clipped. That won't look good in court, especially since you're the one filing for divorce. Is that your professional opinion, or is it because I'm the one with the money? I countered. Paul's eyes narrowed. We can't get anywhere if you keep this up. I'm here to negotiate, not to fight with you. Let's stop here then. I didn't want to talk to you in the first place, I replied, rising from my seat. You can't leave an official meeting in the middle like this, Paul called out. Watch me, I retorted as I strode out of his office. There was no way I was letting either Max or Paul ruin my life. 3 days later. Reluctantly, I found myself sitting through another meeting with Paul today. I had ignored calls from his office for days, but he finally convinced me to meet at a restaurant, so things could remain civil at a public place. Tapping my fingers impatiently, I waited for him. As usual, Paul was late. Sorry, traffic, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. Typical, I replied. You've never been on time. Not everyone has a schedule as free as yours, he shot back. I'm not free, I countered. I just know how to manage my time. The exchange grew tense as always. You love criticizing people, don't you? Paul retorted. Newsflash, you're not perfect either. I never said I was, I replied sharply. But some people need to realize the world doesn't revolve around them. If you think my world revolves around you, you're delusional, he said. It used to, I mumbled before I could stop myself. Silence fell until Paul finally spoke. You remember everything? Yes, including the part where you left, I said coldly. Let's not go there, he sighed. We'll just fight again. Fine, let's focus on the settlement, I agreed, keeping my tone clipped. We discussed terms with strained civility, but by the end, we were no closer to a resolution. Another wasted meeting, I sighed, standing up. Paul grinned. Not wasted. I'd call it enlightening. I'm leaving, I said, exasperated. See you soon, Paul called after me, smug as ever. The next day, Paul and I had another meeting today to discuss the settlement. This time, I initiated it, eager to end the proceedings and reclaim some peace. We met at his office again, as he insisted on reviewing some documents. I feel like I'm spending more time with you than my lawyer, I remarked. Why? Is it because I'm better looking? He teased. Even if you were, I wouldn't care. I don't mix business with my personal life, unlike some, I shot back. You don't? Paul smirked. Remind me who started arguing with me just because I'm your ex? I didn't expect to see you again, I replied coldly. You barged into my life, and I don't want to relive the past. Nor do I, Paul said. Let's just act civil and wrap this up. Agreed, I said firmly. After finishing the paperwork, Paul asked, So how did you end up marrying Max? I sighed. After you disappeared, I spiraled into depression. That's when I met Max. In a bar. A bar! Classic, Paul said, grinning. Cliché, I know, I replied dryly. We connected, dated for a year, and got married. But there wasn't any real love. Just a compromise for stability. Stability? Paul frowned. You, of all people, didn't see through him. I was so lost I'd have dated anyone who showed me attention, I admitted. Looking back, I think Max saw my despair and took advantage of it. Paul's expression suddenly softened. I'm sorry. I blinked in surprise. Wow. I never thought I'd hear an apology from you. I didn't leave to ruin your life, you know, he said, and I saw sincerity in his eyes. Then why did you leave? I asked, my voice firm. Paul hesitated. I didn't have a choice. Actually, his phone rang, cutting him off. Sorry, this is important. Let's finish this another time. I nodded and left his office, my mind swirling with questions. Next time, I vowed I'd get the truth. A few days later, Paul and I were meeting again, but this time we were meeting at my house. I decided that a change of venue might improve our talks. Wow, your house is beautiful. I am pretty sure you don't have any inherited wealth. How did you even afford this? Paul said, gawking at my house. I've worked hard for this, I shrugged casually. Pretty amazing. Though I always knew you had the smarts for it, he grinned. Yeah, by the way, would you like a cup of coffee? I said dismissively. If you're the one making it, then of course. I remember you used to make the best coffee, he remarked. I didn't reply and started preparing 2 mugs of coffee. After a while, I handed one to him. As he took a sip, I asked, So, does it taste the same? 100%, he grinned, and then his eyes softened. I actually missed this. Coffee? I chuckled. You could have always gotten one at a good coffee shop. It wouldn't have tasted the same, he replied softly. Don't you remember how many cups of coffee I used to drink? Of course I do. I was pretty sure you were addicted to coffee at that time, I remarked. Well, not anymore. I hardly drink even 1 cup of coffee throughout the day, he confessed. Wow, you've changed, I said, surprised. Well, life wasn't the same without you, he sighed, suddenly seeming sad. I frowned. If that's true, then why did you leave in the first place? I didn't have a choice, he replied. As if. You always have a choice, and you chose to leave me, I retorted. I only left you because I didn't want you to get in trouble, he shot back. Trouble? What do you mean? I asked, surprised. Leave it, it's not important, he dismissed it. I grabbed his shoulders. You can't say something like that and not explain it. Please, I pleaded softly. Paul took a deep breath. Fine, I'll tell you. But don't blame me if it complicates things further. When we were dating at that time, I was hiding a huge secret from you. I told you everything was fine with my life, but it wasn't. I was in huge debt at that time. I had taken a few loans out before I met you, and that put me under a debt. I didn't have a stable job to pay for it either. You left me because of your debt? I could have helped you, I replied. That wasn't the only reason. And the last thing I wanted was to get you in trouble when you finally started working in the company you wanted. Anyway, my family had always disliked you, so when they offered me the chance to pay for my debt, I took it. The only condition was that I had to break up with you, he confessed. So you did, I replied softly. But why didn't you ever tell me this? I always thought you broke up with me because you were in love with someone else, I sighed, frustrated. How could I be, Paul said, suddenly coming closer to me. I never even dated anyone after we broke up. I just engrossed myself in work. I chuckled embarrassingly, suddenly realizing our closeness. And here I am, married to a man I don't even love. I don't blame you for it, he replied softly. If anything, I blame myself for leaving without any explanation. Do you? What can you do about it then, I asked, suddenly feeling bold as I brushed my lips against his cheek. We can't do this. Do you understand how much trouble this would put us in? He said, turning away. I don't care, I replied firmly. Tell me you don't feel the same. The problem is, I do, Paul replied and met my lips, kissing me tenderly and then passionately. Our kiss was everything we'd been missing all these years. Yet when our lips met, everything seemed to be back to the times when we were in love. Want to take this further? I asked between gasps. I thought you would never ask, Paul grinned as he pulled off my shirt. Soon we were completely lost in each other, our hands gently exploring as we surrendered to the moment. When it ended, we cuddled close, and for the first time in a long while, I finally felt at peace. 3 days later, Paul and I were cuddling in my bed. We ended up hooking up again, as we had done multiple times in the past few days. I wasn't sure if our relationship was just physical, but at the moment, I didn't care. All I wanted was to be in Paul's arms. Don't you think we're breaking all the rules? I asked Paul lazily. Don't you think it's a little too late to think about it? He smirked while running his hand through my hair. I chuckled softly. Maybe. But I don't mind bending the rules for you. Really? I guess I'll have to make you say that again and again, he grinned and started kissing me again. I pushed him away after a while and remarked, Are you going to stay in bed all day? Let me make coffee for us. He winked. I don't mind, but coffee sounds better. Soon we were sipping 2 steaming cups of coffee while discussing our case. We had managed to keep our case and our personal lives separate till now. I wish you would tell me something, I said, exasperatedly, asking about Max for the 100th time. That won't be right, as I am his lawyer. Just because I am sleeping with you doesn't mean I can break all ethical codes and put my client at risk, he replied coolly. Yeah, but you're fighting against me. Why don't you just ditch Max and become my lawyer? I winked at him. Look at you. Didn't you despise my face just a few days ago? He tisked. So did you, I replied indignantly. Alright, if you're not going to talk about Max, then let's talk about something other than the case, I shrugged. I don't mind, he grinned. How about we talk about that kiss again? I threw a cushion at him. Get your mind out of the gutter, I said exasperatedly. Fine, fine, he replied, shielding himself. I'll talk about something else. So, how's the job amidst everything? I sighed. It's just surviving. I just have too much on my plate, and it's difficult to manage everything. Never thought I would hear that from you, Paul smirked. But if it makes you feel better, Max has agreed to come to a settlement soon. I smiled. That's good to hear. Maybe I will finally get some peace. But I suddenly frowned as a thought came into my mind. But what about us? What do you mean? We'll keep meeting like this, he shrugged. Like this? I asked, annoyed. Do you just care about sleeping with me? Come on, don't tell me you want to get married to me just after divorcing your husband, he replied dismissively. I didn't mean something so far-fetched. But shouldn't we start at least dating each other? I asked. Let's not ponder about it now. We can discuss it in the future, he shrugged casually and gave me a peck on the cheek. I'll take my leave now. As he left, my mind was left with an important question. Was our relationship just physical? Did Paul not care about me at all? 1 week later, Paul and I had hooked up several times last week, but our relationship seemed stuck. He never made any effort to move things forward, always citing excuses like it's too soon or we'll talk after the case. I was hesitant to dive into a new relationship after my bad marriage, but I wanted more than just a physical connection, something emotional. Today I was at Paul's office discussing case details. While we kept our affair private, we couldn't resist a few stolen kisses. This is exhausting, I sighed. When will this be over? Divorce proceedings can take months, Paul replied. What? I have to deal with Max for that long? I asked, shocked. Paul smirked. Not that long. It'll likely be done in a few weeks. I hope so, I said, relieved. I keep feeling like I'm cheating on Max with this affair. You're not, Paul reassured me, grinning. Then suddenly he asked, When did you become such a control freak? Excuse me? I asked, surprised. Well, Max has been saying you controlled him. He had some surprising things to say, Paul explained. I never controlled him. He spent my money however he liked, I shot back. Wait, didn't you hide your money from him? Paul asked, looking confused. Of course not. I couldn't even stop him from using it, I replied. What about your time? Were you too busy to spend time with him? No, it was the opposite. He kept canceling our plans to hang out with friends. Paul slumped in his seat. It's all been a lie. Max has been lying to me the whole time. What? But you knew what he was like. Why believe him? I asked. I knew he lied about some things, but I didn't expect it to be everything. He painted you as the villain and himself as a saint, Paul said, frustrated. You believed him? You know me better than that, I replied. I didn't think he'd lie about everything. After so many years, I thought maybe you'd changed, Paul admitted. Why didn't you tell me this before? I kept asking about Max, I said. He was my client. I wouldn't have said anything if he hadn't come up with a ridiculous lie again, Paul replied. So what now, I asked. I'm confronting him, Paul said firmly. And then what? He'll just hire a new lawyer, I pointed out. You want me to stay with him, Paul asked, annoyed. For now, at least, I suggested. Fine. I'll support you from now on. When the time's right, I'll leave his case and back you fully. I grinned. Told you should have been my lawyer. Paul smiled. Seems like you were right. A few days later, everything was finally falling into place. Paul had been secretly helping me expose Max's lies, and our relationship had taken a fresh turn. We were now going out on secret dates. While there were no commitments yet, I was content just being by his side. Paul sighed. His lies keep getting worse. Yesterday he claimed you trapped him in the marriage. What? That's absurd! If anything, he's the one who manipulated me, I replied, shocked. Yes, I know. That's why I'm helping you. Besides, the judge won't tolerate his dishonesty. I nodded. You're right. We have to expose him. I've already informed my lawyer about your help, though he was a bit surprised at first. Good thing you didn't mention our relationship, Paul teased. Of course not. But I had to tell him you were helping, or he wouldn't trust the information, I shrugged. Paul smiled. Honestly, things are looking up for us. Yeah. Who would have thought we'd reconnect after all these years, I chuckled. Definitely not me. Especially after I caused the breakup, Paul admitted. It wasn't all your fault, I said, slipping before realizing my mistake. What do you mean? Paul's eyes widened. Panic set in as I tried to deflect. I didn't mean anything, it just slipped out. No, you meant something. What are you hiding? Paul demanded. I sighed, realizing there was no turning back. Fine, I'll tell you. Before you left, your family contacted me. They wanted me to stay away from you and even threatened my career. I had worked so hard to get into my dream company, so I let you go. I didn't fight for us. You chose your career over me? Paul's voice was full of disbelief. And you still accused me of loving someone else? I didn't know why you were leaving. Didn't you choose your family over me too? I retorted. I did it to protect you, Paul shot back. And so did I shouted. Paul sighed heavily. I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving. Fine, leave, just like you always do, I snapped, the words spilling out without thought. Paul froze, sadness flickering in his eyes before he turned and walked out. As the door closed, I sank to the floor, the weight of my mistakes crushing me. In one moment, I had lost everything. 3 days later. I had been calling and texting Paul nonstop, but he hadn't replied to any of my messages or calls. I had even tried to arrange a meeting with him by going to his office, but even that had been unsuccessful. Paul was ignoring me completely and didn't even want to see me. But I wasn't going to give up this easily. I was going to go to his office today and confront him. Paul! I shouted, barging into his office. Thankfully, he seemed to be alone. What are you doing here? He grimaced. How can you ask me that when you've been ignoring me? I shot back. I am ignoring you because you lied to me and made it seem that our breakup was all my fault, he retorted. I know I lied, but didn't you hide things from me too? But I didn't act like you've been acting. The fact that you left me feeling lost and depressed was never a lie. Just because I didn't stop you didn't mean I wanted you to go, I shouted. Paul's expression suddenly changed and he seemed guilty. You're right. I didn't deserve your forgiveness either, yet you still forgave me. I forgave you because I knew even after everything you still cared about me. Can't you see the same in me? I asked softly. I'm sorry, Jason. I wasn't just upset at you, but at my family too, for putting us both against each other and having a hand in everything. I was upset because I couldn't stop them from breaking us apart. But they can't do anything now as I cut ties with them a long time ago, Paul admitted. Does that mean we can be together again? I asked hopefully. Yes. But let's take it slow this time, he replied. I nodded as Paul pulled me in and I put my arms around him. We might be taking our relationship slow this time, but it was going to be steady as we were moving forward after resolving all our past disputes. A week later, Paul was back at my house and we were discussing the case. We were confident that I would be winning the case against Max and soon the divorce process would be complete. I am tired, I said after discussing the case for hours. Really? Want me to take your mind off the case, he smirked. And how exactly would you do that, I teased, leaning in closer to him. I have a few things in mind, he replied, brushing his lips against mine. Well, I'm definitely interested, I smiled, meeting his lips. Soon we were kissing passionately, lost in each other. What the hell are you guys doing? A voice shouted from the doorway. A voice I knew too well. It was Max who had walked in on us while we were kissing. What are you doing here? I stammered. Have you forgotten this is my house too? He shot back. Max, please let me explain, I started. There's nothing to explain. You've been sleeping around with my lawyer. No wonder things weren't going in my favor, Max shouted. It's not because of our relationship, but because of your lies that you've been losing this case, Paul replied coldly. I can't believe this. You've been plotting this whole time with my ex. This is not going to end well for either one of you, he shot back. Please, Max, let's discuss this civilly, I pleaded. There's nothing left to discuss. See you in court. By the way, Paul, you're off this case. I'm hiring another lawyer, he said before storming out of the house. What do we do now? I looked at Paul, worriedly. Don't worry, we've got this. We'll fight him together, he replied confidently. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief at Paul's support and anxiety about what awaited us in court. A few days later, Max and I stood in divorce court, facing each other with no intention of settling. So, Mr. Hall, you filed for this divorce? The judge asked. Our marriage was based on compromise and constant conflict, I replied from the witness stand. Yet you refused to provide Mr. Roberts with alimony, the judge questioned. I offered maintenance, but he demanded half my wealth, which I find unreasonable, I explained. The judge turned to Max. Mr. Roberts, you're not entitled to such a claim given that the marital issues were mutual. But it's unfair that I get nothing out of this divorce, Max protested, digging himself deeper. Watch your tone in court, Mr. Roberts, the judge warned. Suddenly, Max shouted, Wait, Your Honor! I have proof that Jason was unfaithful! I froze as a video of Paul and me kissing played in the courtroom. When had Max recorded this? Mr. Hall and Mr. Harrington, care to explain? The judge asked sternly. Paul stepped forward. I take full responsibility, Your Honor. You realize this could cost you your license, Mr. Harrington? The judge said. I do, but Mr. Hall is not to blame, Paul replied firmly. The judge ended the session, warning Paul of possible action. Outside the courtroom, I confronted him. Why would you risk your career for me? Paul gave a sad smile. Because I care about you. Because I love you. His unexpected confession left me stunned. What do we do now? I asked, overwhelmed. Paul took my hands. We don't let Max win. We'll fight this together. I nodded, feeling more confident. With Paul by my side, I was certain we'd prevail. 4 days later, Paul and I had meticulously gathered every piece of evidence against Max to expose his lies in court. Today was the day of the hearing, and I felt confident that justice was on our side. What do you have to say for yourself, Mr. Roberts? The judge asked sternly, reviewing the damning evidence we had submitted. Your Honor, I'm being framed! None of this is true, Max stammered, visibly flustered. No, Mr. Roberts. It is clear that you have been deceiving everyone, including this court. After reviewing all the evidence presented, the court has reached a decision. The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered the verdict. The divorce between Jason Hall and Max Roberts is hereby approved. Jason Hall will not be required to pay any financial compensation to Max Roberts. Furthermore, Mr. Roberts is ordered to pay $10,000 to Mr. Hall for mental harassment, stress, and defamation, along with a $2,000 fine to the court for perjury. Failure to comply will result in further legal consequences. This is outrageous! I refuse to pay! Max shouted, his face contorted in anger. The judge's tone grew sharper. Mr. Roberts, I advise you to watch your conduct in this courtroom, or you will face additional charges. Max clamped his mouth shut, but his furious expression said it all. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Finally, justice had prevailed. The judge continued. As for Mr. Harrington, no strict action will be taken. However, he is issued a warning to refrain from any similar actions in the future. Thank you, Your Honor. I deeply regret my actions and will ensure they are not repeated, Paul replied sincerely. I turned to Paul, smiling with gratitude. Against all odds, everything had worked out in the end. Finally, I felt free from the weight of the past and ready to move forward. A few hours later, Paul and I were celebrating our victory at a cozy restaurant. Wow, I never expected the judge to order Max to pay me reimbursement, I said, unable to hide my relief. I think even the judge was fed up with Max's lies, Paul chuckled. You're probably right, I replied with a smile. I'm just glad it's all over now, and that your career is safe too. Yeah, it feels almost too good to be true, he said. So what's next for you? I'm definitely taking a long overdue vacation, I sighed. Paul grinned. Need some company? Of course. Who else would annoy me the entire trip, I teased, smirking. Feigning a frown, Paul leaned forward. But seriously, what does this mean for us? I smiled, my heart full. It means I want to make you my official boyfriend. Wow, lucky me, he exclaimed, his grin widening. No, I said softly, meeting his eyes. I'm the lucky one. You came back into my life and stood by me through everything. I can't thank you enough. Getting a bit sentimental, are we? He teased, though his expression softened. Maybe, I admitted. Then I took a deep breath. But I have a confession to make. I love you, Paul, more than I ever thought possible. His eyes glistened as he leaned closer. I thought I'd never hear you say it. I love you too, more than you could ever know. As he pulled me into a kiss, the world seemed to fade away. In that perfect moment, everything felt right. Conclusion. Paul and I finally went on that long-awaited vacation, and it turned out to be exactly what we needed. It brought out the best in both of us and deepened our connection. Before long, Paul moved in with me, and our days became filled with love and joy. Together we left our past conflicts behind and embraced a future built on trust and understanding. A few years later, Paul and I decided to get married. It was a small, intimate ceremony, but unlike my previous marriage, this time, I was marrying for love, not compromise. Marrying Paul turned out to be the best decision of my life, and together, we found our happily ever after. The end. Question. Would you ever consider taking your ex back? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome!